Counts Coalition is a standalone 501c3 organization. So we are not part of the U.S. Census Bureau, and we are not part of the NC Complete Count Commission, but those are both of our partners, and we do work with them to strategically align our initiatives for the state of North Carolina. We do consider ourselves to be the conveners, the coordinators, and connectors. So thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. And we do want you to know this is actually our first webinar, so please be gentle with us as we work through some of the kinks and technical difficulties. Thanks to our program assistant, Beatrice, for helping us coordinate and put this webinar on today. And we do know that the information to you is going to be so interesting and informative that you're going to want to know more. So don't worry, we've got you covered. We're really excited to announce that this is one of many upcoming webinars for NC Counts Coalition. So we'll actually have a webinar Lunch and Learn series beginning this Friday, and it will be every Friday from 12 to 1. And our first webinar will actually be with CUNY as well as with Carolina Demography, which will be a deep dive into using CUNY's map, which is a national resource, and Carolina Demography's North Carolina specific hard to count map to target your outreach. So we definitely encourage you after today's webinar to stay plugged in and hopefully join us every Friday. And if you would like more information on our events, we definitely encourage you to check out our website, nccensus.org. And you could join the coalition for emails and updates, as well as you could check out our calendar, which is updated regularly with not only webinars, but workshops, trainings, and events once we get closer to the census season. So with that, we'll jump right into our content for the day. As of today, we are actually 65 days out from Census 2020, which is really scary. We're getting very close to our date. So today's webinar is going to provide you with an overview of the census operation. Our speakers will talk about the importance of the census to North Carolina communities, challenges to achieving a complete and accurate count, and solutions to overcoming challenges to a complete and accurate count for North Carolina communities. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Jess Stanford. Jess is a member of Carolina Demography's analysis team. Jessica Stanford helps clients answer their pressing questions about demographic, social, and economic trends. She also presents on these topics throughout the state. Prior to joining Carolina Demography, she was a lead researcher on a community food assessment of Harrisonburg, Virginia. Ms. Stanford earned her BS degree in Geographic Information Systems at James Madison University. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Jess Stanford.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. All right, did we want to move forward on the slide? All right, so thank you all for having me this afternoon. Thank you, Stacy, for that introduction. So I want to talk with you all today about what challenges we face in achieving an accurate count in 2020. I'm going to touch on some of the challenges that we're facing that are new for the first time in the 2020 census, as well as some historical challenges for certain communities being undercounted. And then I'm going to conclude with a brief tutorial on that hard to count interactive map that Stacy mentioned. So I encourage you all, if you're interested, after the end of my presentation, to check back on Friday to hear Rebecca, our director of Carolina Demography, go in more in depth on that, using that map. So before I kick off, I want to give you all a little more background on who we are, Carolina Demography. We are a research consulting service at UNC Chapel Hill, and we help stakeholders like yourself understand where North Carolina's population is headed. We do everything from providing raw demographic data to conducting analysis and then hosting webinars and presentations like this one to help individuals better understand what changes are taking place. So, as I mentioned, there are a few major challenges that we're facing in the 2020 census. These range from some new emerging challenges related to that technical shift in 2020, as well as historical challenges with certain communities that have previously been undercounted in earlier census years. So as probably many of you know, we are transitioning for the first time from a mail-in census to a primarily internet-based census in 2020. The Census Bureau is encouraging all who have the ability to turn in their census either by phone or over the internet. This could definitely prove to be beneficial in helping keeping costs down, but for certain communities in North Carolina, this poses a real risk. This map here shows the counties in North Carolina that the share of households in that county that have an internet subscription. So the counties here marked in dark blue are those where less than 2/3 of households had a high-speed internet subscription in 2017. So you can see that a couple of counties that fall under WNC Pathways jurisdiction tended to have low rates of internet access. Those were like Graham, Swain, and Yancey counties. So rural communities like this definitely have some new emerging challenges for this digital-based census, but they've also faced some challenges in previous census years related to a few key issues. So the Census Bureau classifies communities that are hard to count along 4 typically overlapping buckets. Communities that may be hard to locate often communities that may be hard to locate are those that are maybe housing units that are not in frame, meaning their digital address locator map, and rural communities would certainly fall into this. There are households and communities that are hard to contact. These are highly mobile populations such as renters, individuals experiencing homelessness, or even gated communities where census enumerators have a tough time getting to those households. Then hard to persuade communities, certainly a challenge in the census as well. Even though the citizenship question was removed from the 2020 census, there was still quite a lot of reporting being done on that in the news, and that may have dissuaded some individuals from feeling confident in the census process. And then finally, there are communities that are considered hard to interview, whether that be language barriers, literacy rates, or again, with the issue with rural communities having low internet access. So populations that have been previously hard to count in 2010, 2000, etc., were renters and 18 to 24-year-olds. Those are our really mobile populations. Whitney will go into greater depth about this in the next presentation, but children under 6 have also been historically hard to count, as well as the American Indian, Hispanic, Black households, and migrant households, individuals who moved in within the last year. So all told, this map shows the response rates from the 2010 census, and those census tracts here that are marked in yellow or red were those where there were pretty low response rates. We have about 950,000 North Carolina residents living in one of those high-risk census tracts. That's nearly 10% of our population. So in conjunction with NC Counts, Carolina Demography developed this interactive map that can help stakeholders locate who the hard to count communities in their area are and what factors are responsible for communities in that specific county for being hard to count. I'm going to run through how to use this very briefly, and please let me know if you all have any questions. So the first thing you can do is type in a specific county name here in this address bar that will allow you to zoom to a specific area. For this example, I selected Wake County, so you can type that in, and it's going to show you the census tracts or neighborhood size areas within that county, and it'll show you where there are more high risk and lower risk areas. So to identify what risk factor you want to select by, this drop-down menu gives you a few options. Some of these are singular factors, like the percent of that census tract that is that has children under 5, or the percent of that census tract that is foreign-born. Or you can explore the intersection of these risk factors, such as where is a census tract that has low internet access, high percentage of the population children under 5, and has a racially and ethnically diverse population. So I selected internet, children, and race for the factor. And you can see that legend at the bottom where the header says quintile. The darkest census tracts are those which are at highest risk, and then the lightest colored census tracts are those at lowest risk. Yep, so you can zoom in on where you want to see the highest risk communities. So if you click on one of these census tracts, you can see more details. And a tooltip will pop up that'll give you some greater information. So for this census tract within Wake County, you can see that one of the reasons it's very high risk is it has a high share of households without internet. 30% of households in that neighborhood did not have internet access, compared to just 10% for Wake County's total average. And then if you scroll down below the map, that same census tract you selected will also give you a more greater in-depth report about what factors account for making this neighborhood hard to count. And that link on the left there is where you can find our map. Also, if you just go to nccensus.org's homepage, or NC Counts, I'm sorry, is that incorrect? NC Counts website will have our web app right on the front page. It's also under the resources tab. And if you want to get in contact with us, that is our contact info on the right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jess, for that great overview of some of the challenges in achieving a complete and accurate count. Now what we're going to do is dive a little bit deeper into some of our hard to count communities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Whitney Tucker. And Whitney Tucker is a research director at NC Child, where she leads the organization's data and research initiatives, providing actionable analysis of public policies that impact North Carolina's children and families. Whitney's annual work includes the North Carolina Child Health Report Card, NC Child's County Data Cards, and management of the North Carolina Kids Count Data Program. Whitney was appointed to the North Carolina Complete Count Commission in 2018 and chairs the Education and Youth Committee for Census 2020. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn it over to our partner, Whitney Tucker of NC Child.
Thank you, Stacy. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. All right, so go ahead and we can move on to the next slide then. I'm going to start with a quick overview of NC Child for those who are unfamiliar with us as an organization and our work. Basically, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy advocacy organization, and we really work on behalf of kids and families to push forward policies that support them across the state and across a broad range of issue areas. You see on the slide here our primary focus areas, but we really try to keep ourselves really nimble and respond to needs as they arise for kids and families in the state, and make sure that we are making sure that legislators and other decision makers statewide are keeping children's best interests at the front of mind all the time. And we really combine the strategy of four different strategies to achieve those goals. And one is research and data analysis, which really pulls in my work a lot in writing fact sheets and policy briefs and that sort of thing. But we also have strategic communications department. We engage in direct advocacy and lobbying. And also we have a community engagement division that really works across the state to make sure that people are talking to each other more about the issues that impact kids. And that's really how the census rose to the top of mind. Okay, next slide. So Jess already talked about all of the different changes that have been made to this census from previous censuses in the past. And as we were hearing all of that news coverage at NC Child, we started to wonder if, this is likely going to have an impact on our state's count, because national organizations have really been calling attention for the last 5 years or so to the fact that children under age 6, and particularly children under age 5 even, tend to be undercounted in the census. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but I wanted to show a little bit about North Carolina's child data so that you understand our state's rapidly changing demographics and why the census is so important here. So right now, our total population in the state is just about 2.4 million and 64% white. For comparison, the child population in the state is just over 2.4 million and only 54% white. This is really going to be relevant in a second when I talk to you about hard to count communities and how that kind of overlaps with the age issue that I just brought up. So in terms of population trends, the fastest growing population in the state for North Carolina is Hispanic and Latino children. And from 2010 to 2016, the U.S. Census Bureau estimates that our state's Hispanic population grew by 132,000 new residents, which represented a 16.5% increase. That's relevant because Latino children now account for 18% of children in North Carolina under the age of 5. And this is important when we talk about the census because it means that the 2020 census is not only going to be the first in which our state is going to be able to capture the magnitude of our population growth, but also that our count is going to be particularly difficult because children under age 5 and Hispanic or Latino children accounted for 2 of the top 3 populations with the highest net undercount rates in the 2010 census, which you're going to see in our next slide. So if North Carolina is to receive its due share of congressional representation and financial resources from the federal government, we're going to have to take additional steps this year to reach the families of young children, particularly Hispanic and Latino families. So here you see just the undercount rates across a broad range of demographic groups to give you an idea of just how bad our undercount of young children was in 2010. This is national data, but young children had a higher net undercount rate by far than any other demographic group in the 2010 census. And since 1980, the net undercount of young children in the census has actually worsened, while our coverage of older children and adults has improved. So you'll see that there are some population groups that we actually tend to overcount in the census, while young children, we consistently undercount. Next slide. And then going back to our state's population trends, you see that among young children, Hispanic children are the least likely to be counted, followed closely by a really high undercount of Black children. It's actually estimated that in 2010, North Carolina missed more than 25,000 young children in the state in our census forms. Independent researchers have since said that if those children had been counted, so not even thinking about all the adults that we also missed, our state would have already received an additional seat in Congress. Next slide. So why are young kids hard to count? Basically, it's because young kids tend to be overrepresented in population groups that are hard to count, right? So North Carolina's young children disproportionately live in areas with characteristics that make them difficult for the U.S. Census Bureau to count. And it then makes them live in areas where there tends to be a low census response. So I've listed some of the hard to count groups on the slide here. Things like low-income households, highly mobile families, so families that move a lot, that rent, young families tend to do this. Also families that rely on migrant work. Non-native English speakers, complex families, so families where, say, a grandparent might be the head of household, and several people are living in the house for an extended period of time, but it's not permanent. Those folks tend to fill out the census form and leave off some people, and often the person is a young child under age 5. It's relevant to note that among all of those children, you could see here in the chart on the left, the percent of each age group population that the Census Bureau believes lives in the conditions that are listed to the left there. But it's worth noting that the kids who are most likely to be undercounted in the census are also the kids who are most likely to suffer from reductions in funding to really vital children's programs in our country and in our state. Next slide. You could see some of the funding that we get from some of those programs here on this slide. So really things like Medicare Part B payments, the school lunch program, foster care, Title IX, all of those things receive some portion of their funding based on our census count. But then there are also just more general needs like our highways and emergency planning and family needs planning, like where we should put childcare centers and grocery stores. That sort of thing is determined based on the data that we get from the census. And if that data is inaccurate, then children and families are going to have a dearth of resources. And so we see that this under-resourcing of public programs is a direct consequence of undercounting kids and that data accuracy, in addition to just the loss in power they get in terms of representation at the congressional level. Next slide, please. And it's important to note that while the net undercount of young kids is incredibly high at that 4.6% that I showed on a previous slide, the Census Bureau has found that their omission rate is even higher. It's 10.3% compared to that 4.6. So what that means is that not only are many young children, primarily those in hard to count communities, living in families that are not submitting their census forms, but even more are being left off of census forms in families that do return the forms with information about other household members. The Census Bureau estimates that 80 to 85% of young children who were missed in the 2010 census were in families that did return a questionnaire. And this is really important to know from a messaging standpoint, because we have to emphasize not only is the census convenient and safe and required, which is what's on all of the Census Bureau resources, but also you need to return the questionnaire, or in this year's case, you need to make sure that you go in online and fill in the code that's going to be on that postcard you get to your house. And then also that you need to make sure that everyone in your household is included, even the little bitty babies. And focus group testing has been done from a variety of different groups, and I think that Juliana is going to get into this a little bit more. But one message that's been found consistent by the Census Bureau across a range of races and ethnicities is funding for public services as the top most important reason to respond to the census, even among those who are resistant to completing the form otherwise. Next slide. Then I just want to close with a quick cheat sheet to help you learn more about the census and its impact on young children and what you can be doing to help prevent an undercount in your community. So our State Complete Count Commission website, the official site for the state's coordinating group is census.nc.gov. But beyond that, NC Child also has materials available, and we've sort of been trying to compile some of the best things that we've seen related to the undercount of young kids in particular, and that's at our site, ncchild.org/census. And then for materials targeted specifically at addressing the Latino undercount in the census, NALEO has created a really rich site with lots of materials that are available in both English and Spanish to help you work in communities called Hágase Contar. And they also have a site focused on the undercount of young children called Hazme Contar. But you can get to that by going to the link that I have on this slide here. So when you get these in your inbox, you'll be able to go back and click through some of those and look through and see if there's something that could be useful to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Whitney, for all of that great information in regards to the undercount of young children. So next, as Whitney had mentioned, we're going to move to our next speaker, Juliana Cabrales, who's going to talk a little bit more about the undercount of the Latinx community, as well as some messaging strategies. Juliana Cabrales is Mid-Atlantic Director with the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, NALEO Educational Fund. In this capacity, Juliana promotes the organization's civic engagement campaigns in the Mid-Atlantic region and North Carolina while providing programmatic support to national civic engagement efforts. She was born in Barranquilla, Colombia, and Juliana, you could correct me on that if I said it incorrectly, and since arriving in the United States has lived mostly in the Southeast. Since joining the nonprofit sector, Juliana has worked with the Latino community in different capacities. Juliana holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Wesleyan College in Macon, Georgia, and an associate in applied science from Parsons, the New School of Design in New York, New York. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to present to you Juliana Cabrales.
Thank you, Stacy. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today to chat a little bit about
how we can work towards a full enumeration of the Latino community, and then also I'll do some diving into messaging research that's been done around effective messages to get the Latino community members and others hard to count communities to participate this year in the census. So really quickly, as Stacy mentioned, the Leo Educational Fund, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization that works towards the full participation of Latinos in the American political process. Oftentimes, that work revolves around naturalization, voter engagement, and census. We were established in 1981. Our main office is in Los Angeles, but I actually have been leading the Educational Fund work in North Carolina since late 2012, and I'm speaking to you today from Raleigh, North Carolina, where I'm based from. So Whitney did a perfect segue. I thought I'd start out with sharing with you some information about our national census efforts. Our Census 2020 campaign is called Hágase Contar, which stands for Make Yourself Count in Spanish. The campaign is focused on regions with significant hard-to-count Latino communities. And through this campaign, we've developed a number of resources, and Whitney touched on some of these. Most are available on the website that's included in the slide. And I also want to highlight that through our Hágase Contar campaign, we have a national bilingual hotline in Spanish and English, 877 El Censo. You can see the number on the screen. And our operators are available Monday through Friday and equipped to answer general questions about the census in Spanish and English. And as we go through the presentation, you'll hear some of the other resources we have. In addition to Hágase Contar, recognizing the importance of getting young Latino children counted in the 2020 census, because of all the items Whitney highlighted, we developed a sub-campaign called Hazme Contar, and we have a lot of resources for educators, for parents, for community members that regularly engage with very young children that can be utilized in your community to motivate parents to include their young children in the census questionnaire. So to shift a little bit, as I think Stacy, Jen, and Whitney both touched on, there's hard to count communities. The census has never been truly accurate, and there's populations that are undercounted. And amongst these groups are Latinos, households with low incomes, immigrants, and individuals with low English proficiency, renters, residents who live in non-traditional housing. Many of these groups, for those of you that work directly with communities, know that a lot of these can overlap, and really that hard to count piece is emphasized and impacts some communities larger than others. As Whitney mentioned, very young children are most likely to get excluded from the census count. We estimate that 400,000 young Latino children were left uncounted in 2010, and a report we released in a couple of years ago shows that that number is a little over 9,000 very young Latino children that were missed here in North Carolina. So besides the undercount of very young Latino children, what other challenges are specific to the Latino community? So for those of you that have seen a version of the census questionnaire, there's a question on Hispanic race and origin that is often very confusing from our community. And if you can move forward another slide, there we go. So as you can see on this slide, question 8 of the census questionnaire asks, is a person of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? And there's some categories there. And then there's a question 9 asks about what is the person's race? And there's some options there. So this question was the #1 question we received in 2010 because Latinos often don't see themselves identified in this category. Only one Latino national origin will be reported by the Census Bureau, regardless of how respondents answer. It's unclear how Latinos will respond to detailed reporting of white and Black subgroup identification, for example, Afro-Caribbean, since they're not included as part of the Black African-American question. And because of the confusion around this question, the Census Bureau actually projects that with this approach, some other race, the category at the bottom of the question about race, will become the second largest racial group in the nation after Census 2020. And I like to include this slide when we talk about challenge just specific to the Latino community, because if you work with Latino community members, it's likely that as you do census outreach, they'll reach back out to you for guidance around this question. We have
a webinar that goes in depth into the history of this question and provides some additional guidance for community organizations. So if you're interested in that, I'd be happy to share that with Stacy for circulation afterwards. In addition to the question about Hispanic origin and race, a challenge we face this census is that we dealt with the administration's last-minute attempt to add an untested citizenship question on the Census 2020 questionnaire. It's important to know that there will not be a question around citizenship on the questionnaire, but because there was an attempt and it was in the news cycle, we expect that it will have a negative effect or create fear among community members that are hesitant to participate. On the screen, you see what that addition of that question would have looked like. And when I dive into a little bit more of messaging research, I'll chime in on what we've heard about from community members. As you work with the Latino community, and we can go to the next slide, if questions around the citizenship question come up, it's important to remind folks that there never been a question about citizenship asked of the entire US population. The last time the Census Bureau did anything similar was in 1950, prior to the enactment of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So again, no citizenship question on the 2020 census questionnaire. And when we talk a little bit about messaging research, I'll share with you what we've heard from community members about it. Next slide. So what made the citizenship question case so important to Latinos? Census officials estimated that 6.5 million residents would have not responded to the questionnaire, and lower response rates would have been driven up the cost of the census by increasing expenses for non-response follow-up operations. So again, I won't dive into this subject a little bit more because luckily we don't have to deal with it this year, but just emphasizing what it would have meant to have that question on the questionnaire for Latinos, and also for community members that did hear about this attempt and might not have information about what that questionnaire is actually going to look like, what the effect might be. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about the challenges, and as we shift towards the messaging research, I quickly wanted to share with all of you what the actual census participation will look like and what languages will be available for the different portions of the census. So the Census Bureau will have available bilingual paper forms. So there will be a version of the paper form available in English and a version of the paper form available in English and Spanish. No other languages will be available in the paper form. Next slide. For the phone option, since individuals are able to respond to the census over the phone, this slide lists the English and the 12 non-English languages in which that assistance will be available. And same languages will be available for the online component. And you can see those on the next slide. In addition, the Census Bureau recognizes that there's a need for additional assistance in other languages, and so they'll be producing language glossaries, language ID cards, and language guides in 59 non-English languages to help non-English speakers complete their form, and those are available on this slide. Some of these resources are already available on the Census Bureau site. Again, happy to share a link with folks as to where they can find these resources. So for the final portion of my presentation, let's shift a little bit to the messaging research that Naleo Educational Fund has conducted and some of other national groups have conducted. So in 2018, we did a national poll representative of adult Latino populations. We surveyed close to 1,600 Latinos in April of 2018 and conducted 4 focus groups. This took place in May of 2018. And through these national poll and focus groups, we really tried to understand where the Latino community stood on the census and identify effective messengers and messages for Latinos. So what did our messaging research find? That overall, the focus group participants had a positive view of the census, but when they saw a version of the actual questionnaire, hesitation, fear, and lack of confidence arose. Survey respondents overwhelmingly expressed a preference to complete the census by mail on a paper form, so the online option was not an attractive way to participate. In addition, messaging around the census being convenient, safe, and required showed the most positive response for the folks that completed the survey online. In the focus groups, messaging that connected the importance of the census to the impact it has on funding for local schools and community programs was the most effective. Non-surprisingly, family members were the most trusted messengers, and other messengers such as nurses, doctors, health providers, Latino community organizations, people who speak for children or schools, such as teachers, were trusted and convincing. So as you plan on who's going to be motivating folks to participate in your community, these are things to keep in mind. As I mentioned, we tested different messages. Immigrants were especially responsive to the convenience, safety, and required messages, so similar to the folks that participated on the online survey. Women were most responsive to the messaging about civic and community duty. So if you work with groups that are mainly composed of women, this is something to keep in mind. And younger Latinos under the age of 10, were most responsive to a message around resistance, about participating in the census as a way to stand up for your community. In addition to that, we asked Latinos that participated in the survey and focus groups where they got their information and who they trusted most when it came to obtaining information. Spanish speakers, not surprisingly, mentioned Spanish language media as a trusted source of information. Younger participants had more favorable views of social media. Survey participants frequently searched online to get more information or to verify what they had heard on social media or the news. And in addition to that, they talked about email and Facebook as being the most frequently used. Twitter was used least frequently. Specifically, when we looked at the findings of the survey and focus group when it came to the undercount of children, we heard from households with children on age 17 and younger that 53% said that they had one or more children age 17 and younger in the household, and among those, 11% said that they would not count them or did not know if they would include them in the survey, which is very interesting because I think tying to Whitney's points earlier, we have folks that are responding to the census, but for reasons we don't know, are leaving children off the fold. In addition to that, when it came to households with children age 4 and younger, 24% of survey respondents stated that they had one or more children age 4 and younger, and among them, 15% said they would not count them or did not know if they would. So if you compare households with children age 4 and younger to those that have children age 17 and younger, that hesitation around including children increases the younger the children are. So again, we really need to work towards delivering messages as to why it's important to include very young children. Next slide. So the research I just spoke about was conducted in 2018. We knew that because that captured a very specific point in time, and because that research was conducted before we knew that the citizenship question would not be a part of the questionnaire, we wanted to revisit the research and conduct some additional research this year. So we actually did another national survey in October of last year, and we found significant differences between citizens and non-citizens, and these are Latinos, on plans to participate, understanding uses of the census, comfort with questions, and messages that resonate. Well, 89% of Latinos say they plan to participate, 50% of citizens, 50% that are citizens are extremely likely, 39% being somewhat likely, but only 35% of non-citizens are extremely likely. So immigration status of Latinos plays a big role on whether they want to participate. They're expressing whether they'll participate or not. Half of all the Latinos we surveyed in October, and please keep in mind this is after the Supreme Court decision and the administration's announcement that there would not be a citizenship question, half of all Latinos expected that there will be a citizenship question on the census. And again, the survey was conducted in October. That decision came down in the summer. So some time had gone by, and yet folks were expecting a citizenship question on the questionnaire. Next slide. Confidentiality and security as being major concerns. 83% of the undocumented individuals and 70% of citizens worried that the administration will use census information against immigrants. So ways in which we can continue to deliver messages around the confidentiality and security protections around the census, that's really important. 77% of non-citizens worry about government officials or immigration enforcement could use the census against them or their families. And among citizens, 83% were fine reporting full names and dates of birth, but only 65% of non-citizens said the same. So again, a big gap in between these two, the citizen and non-citizen community, and as to what they're comfortable with sharing on the questionnaire. Next slide. Mail and online are the preferred response rates. Among all Latinos, 39% preferred mail, 33% preferred online. So similar to the 2018 research, mail continues to be the top and most preferred option. And among non-citizens, 42 favor mail, as do 46% of Latinos over 40. So older Latinos preferred the mail option as well. Younger Latinos, not surprisingly, were most likely to prefer the online. Latinos continue to trust other Latinos and say that they're much more likely to participate if they receive information or encouragement from Latino community organizations, local teachers, and local elected officials. So as you think about engaging individuals in your community, how can you partner with Latino community organizations if you're not a partner or part of a Latino community organization currently? And the last slide on NALEO's Educational Fund messaging research, we also found in focus groups that we hosted in October and December in Atlanta, Portland, Orlando, Milwaukee. We actually did 2 focus groups here in Raleigh and in Phoenix. Many think of the Census Bureau as separate from the administration. Reminding Latinos that the administration wanted to include a citizenship question was not helpful. So I really want to emphasize here that it was most helpful to not bring up the citizenship question, and for folks that already knew that that was something that was attempted to be included, clarifying that it was something that was not part of the questionnaire. Most English-speaking Latinos do not want a census worker coming to their homes, so emphasizing the importance of self-response in order to avoid that home visit. And some Spanish-dominant Latinos did want a person who can help them complete that form, and in many cases cited language issues as a reason as to why they wanted assistance. I witnessed some of these focus groups, particularly the ones in Atlanta, and in most cases, older Spanish-dominant Latinos said that they wanted that one-on-one assistance, whether it be person over the phone. So as you're thinking about how you can assist community members in completing their census questionnaire, that's something to keep in mind, the importance of having Spanish-dominant volunteers or staff members that can provide this assistance. And again, not surprisingly, like I mentioned earlier, the race question was confusing for many, and many left it blank. So my last couple of slides, I really wanted to touch on quickly on other messaging research that's been conducted by national organization. Color of Change did some messaging research with Black and African Americans. Again, many of the key findings were similar to the research we did with the Latino community. Top reasons given for not participating, including that it wouldn't make a difference if folks participated, and that government had other ways of getting the information. Something that really stood out among Black African American community members was that they really trusted Black elected leaders as messengers. That's very different from what we saw from the Latino community. Not surprisingly, they cited Michelle Obama and Oprah as effective messengers, and cited cable TV and local TV as top news sources. And social media, similarly to Latinos, was the #1 choice for millennials. Next slide. Asian Americans Advancing Justice conducted similar research with Asian American Pacific Islander communities. And if you want to dive a little bit deeper, my last slide actually has links to the recordings and slides that presents the finding for each of these groups. A lot of concern around the citizenship question. Similarly, their messaging research was also conducted before the citizenship question was removed. Family, so messages around census data as being critical to our family's futures and the next generation. And then in the South, the message around standing up for community and resources was particularly effective. Among the trusted messengers were friends and family, English language media, and teacher and school officials. So again, very similar to what we saw in the Latino messaging research. Next slide. As I mentioned, my last slide touches on some of the other research that was conducted, including the National Congress of American Indians, the Arab American Institute, and the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee. There was some research done by the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund and messaging studies that were actually done with the Bureau as they finalized their public awareness and media buy campaign. So we'll make sure to share these slides with you. There's links that dive a little bit deeper into the messaging each of these national groups conducted, and hopefully these will be helpful as you move forward and plan how to engage community members towards a full enumeration. So on that note, I'll pass it back to Stacy, and thank you everyone for your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Juliana, for helping wrap us up. So at this time, we invite you to please submit your questions in the chat box, and we could pose those questions to our presenters. And as we take a minute for you to present your questions, just want to thank our presenters again for their time and making the census a priority with their respective organizations. As Debbie mentioned before, it's $23.8 billion a year that North Carolina receives from 2020 census funding, and that's for 55 federal spending programs that's guided by census information. And as Whitney wonderfully pointed out, some of those programs that support our young children, as well as just social welfare programs across the state of North Carolina. So let's see, do we have any? One of the questions was whether or not the slides would be shared. And as Juliana mentioned, we will make sure to provide these slides to you all so that you will have the links as well as any additional information. All right, so one of the questions from Taylor, I would imagine that a woman who is pregnant would also include her soon-to-be-born child in the count. And Whitney answered it in the chat box, but I'll let Whitney answer it as well in case other folks have that question.
Sure. So I was just saying that if that baby is going to be born by April 1st, then that woman should definitely include the baby in the count. If she has a due date of April 1st or after, then that baby is part of our North Carolina count.
Awesome. Thanks, Whitney. The next question is, do we have any social media images we could share to get the word out? Would like to let you know we're actually working with NC Center for Nonprofits as well as United Way and NC Grantmakers to come up with a toolkit that is specific for North Carolina nonprofits that will include not only talking points, but also graphics for social media, as well as for flyers or handouts that you may want to create. So excellent question, and that resource will be coming to you in the very near future. Another question is, can we pass out or provide paper copies while at community events? If not, what would be the best use of that connection? Yes, you definitely can. So I think, and Debbie could chime in on this, I think that the census is incredibly important to nonprofits because it supports a lot of programs that you all probably encourage for your clients or that you support for the general well-being of your clients. And we consider nonprofits to be essential for mobilization because you are connected to the communities that we serve. So if you do have an opportunity to provide handouts or other information or whatever future events that you have between now and Census Day, and even after Census Day, because self-response goes all the way up until the end of April, we certainly encourage you to provide handouts or flyers to your clients. And one of the things that we are working on at NC Counts Coalition are pledge cards that you will either be able to print off or you will be able to request printed copies from NC Counts, as well as really little brief one-pagers that you can put on tables at events to provide to your clients.
Hey, Stacy, this is Juliana. If I can quickly chime in. So, Sonia, not sure of your questions about just passing out general information. If when you label paper copies, you're referring to the actual census paper questionnaire, we won't be able to hand those out. So there are some census tracts that will receive a paper questionnaire in that initial mailing. A majority of us, 80%, will receive that invitation to participate online. If we don't participate online after 4 attempts to contact us, you would receive a paper questionnaire. But unfortunately, Only the Census Bureau will be sending those out, and community members cannot call to request one. Sorry, just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, Juliana.
And Stacy, this is Debbie from Nonprofit Pathways. If there are some promotional things that you would like to share with me, I can make sure that everyone gets those to print out and offer at events for education. So if you have that, just pass that along to me and I'll make sure everyone gets that.
Thanks, Debbie. And our next question comes from Taylor. Does anyone know about how long it would take a household to complete a full survey? So I'll start, and then any of the other speakers, if you want to chime in, please feel free to. So in 2010, they promoted it as 10 questions, 10 minutes. So it is 10 questions. Of course, exactly how long it will take you will actually depend on how many individuals are in your household. But I'm guessing on average it's about 10 minutes, and anyone else can chime in on that if you have anything additional to add. All right, any other questions? All right, well, I am not seeing any other questions at this time. So it is, again, our pleasure to bring you this webinar. Thank you so much for bearing with us and the technical difficulties in the beginning, but we made it through, yay. Again, thank you to Beatrice, our program assistant, on putting together this first webinar. Thank you again to all of our awesome speakers for the wonderful work that they do. And thank you so much, Debbie, for inviting us to present with you. Debbie, do you have any closing remarks?
I do not. I will be sending out a follow-up email to everyone that will have the slides and be in contact with you in case we have anything else to add. But anyone can email me if they have questions or need some direction as far as how they can get the word out.
Awesome. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of the work week.